So Canon just announced two new cameras, the R7 and R10. And personally, I think these two cameras are going to be a huge new deciding factor on the future of Canon. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's going on with these two new cameras, and they were literally just announced this morning. So I wanna take a moment, break down these cameras, because quite honestly, here on this channel, we talk a lot about video, and I think especially the R7 is going to be a massive camera for the future of video. All right, so let's first start off with the specs. On the R7, you're gonna get 4K at up to 60 frames per second. On top of that, if you're shooting at 4K 30 or 24, you can also get the option to downsample that 7K sensor to 4K in order to get a sharper image. Add in a sprinkle of 120 frames per second in 1080p, and this camera definitely has you covered in all your different shooting modes, but the video specs don't stop there. On top of all of this, you can shoot these different modes in 10-bit, including C-Log3. Now you might be thinking to yourself, that's a lot for a beginner camera, but there's even more. You're also getting the ability to have an unlimited record time, and the camera has built-in in-body stabilization. The camera is weather sealed, has a flip out screen, and it sports the RF mount. Now, personally, I think that's probably the most important feature of this camera, but I'll explain why I think that in just a second. Because as I mentioned, this camera is gonna be super important for video, and with any video camera, whether that's a cinema camera or a mirrorless camera, you're gonna need certain IO ports in order to fully take advantage of the camera, and this camera doesn't disappoint. As far as IO goes, you're gonna get an HDMI port, a mic input, and a headphone jack for monitoring your audio. Now, if you're like me, you're probably hearing all those specs and thinking, where does this camera fall in Canon's lineup? Well, this camera, although having the RF mount, is Canon's first ever APS-C side sensor with this RF mount, which allows you to get all of these specs for only $14.99 body only. Now, this is an incredible price for a camera of this caliber because of one major benefit that this camera gives you, and that's the ability to upgrade it. What do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to buying cinema cameras or video gear in general, the hardest part for most creators is the fact that, well, we need a lot, whether that is a camera, lenses, lights, audio, you name it. There's so much that goes into the world of video, and buying anything, you have to think about how you're going to be able to upgrade it into the future. Look, the RF mount hasn't been around for very long, but it unlocks so much for any camera that it's on. For starters, you can easily just adapt an EF lens to any camera with an RF mount because you have the $99 EF to RF adapter. But there are so many other adapters. For example, you can also mount PL lenses on any camera that has an RF mount. In fact, on my Red V Raptor that has an RF mount, I bought a wooden camera PL mount adapter, and I was able to mount PL lenses directly to that camera. And with this new R7, you're gonna be able to do the exact same thing with the exact same adapters. Now, with any new camera, you're gonna probably wonder, okay, well, is this camera really going to work the way that Canon has said it's gonna work? And in most cases, I'm pretty skeptical, but Canon actually did something really interesting with the R7 and the R10, and that was they put their Digic X processor in both of them. This is the exact same processor that you can find in the R5, the R6, the R5C, and even the R3. There's a couple good benefits of this. For one, you're gonna get amazing autofocus because you're literally able to port the same autofocusing features from those other cameras, minus the R3, over to this new R7 and R10. But another good benefit of actually having this processor is the fact that it's done and it's proven. They've put the Digic X processor in all these other cameras, which means we know that Canon actually has this chip, which is fantastic in a world of chip shortages. So personally, I'm actually really relieved that they put this better processor in this camera because we know they have it, which means we should get this camera shipped out fairly quickly. Now, so far with the new cameras, we've been primarily talking about video features, but let's not forget that this is a photography camera. That's one of the best parts about using mirrorless cameras, especially as a starting videographer, is that you know that there are going to come times where you're going to need photos. Whether you are a YouTube content creator or you're actually trying to shoot videos for clients, there are going to come times where you're going to need to be able to take a photo, and having a camera that can do both so well is an absolute must. From the photography side of the R7, you're gonna be able to shoot at up to 15 frames per second with a mechanical shutter, but up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. This is basically the ability to shoot a video, but through stills. You know, Canon has always done really well when it comes to the photography specs on their cameras, but for this price range, these specs are kind of unmatched by any other camera. Now, so far, I've kind of been throwing the R7 and the R10 kind of in together because most people are going to be looking at these two cameras, but they are slightly different. For example, the R7 is going to have that 4K at up to 60 frames per second. And yes, the R10 does offer this as well, but on the R10, the 4K 60 is cropped. Another major difference between the two is that on the R10, you're not gonna have that headphone jack that I talked about with the R7. And so as for these minor differences, and because the price difference between the two cameras is literally only $500, that if you are planning on picking up either one of these two cameras for video, I would strongly recommend you picking up the R7. Now, if you are a content creator, filmmaker thinking about picking up this camera, honestly, I think it's gonna be a really good buy. I mean, it's kind of basically replacing the 70D, 80D, 90D lineup, which we've seen so much amazing content created on that. I mean, let's face it, Casey Neistat basically created his entire YouTube career on the 80D alone. But this camera is gonna give you way more than those cameras ever could. But Canon not only came out with these two new cameras, they also came out with some great lenses to go with them. Now, I mentioned earlier that the RF mount is a super important mount when it comes to this camera, but we also have to be underneath the understanding that you need some great lenses that are sort of in the same price range as this camera, especially for those starting out, and that's exactly what Canon gave us. There are a couple different options, but personally, I think the best way to go about purchasing this camera is to actually not buy the kit and to buy body only with a couple other lenses as alternatives. For example, Canon has obviously what is probably one of their most famous lenses, their Nifty 50. You can actually pick up the Nifty 50 for under $180 right now on B&H. On top of that, they also have some other great prime options, including the 16mm and the 35mm, which you can actually get the 35mm for $50 off right now on B&H's website, which is a sale that's currently going on, so I'll be sure to have that linked down below in the description. Now, if you are looking for a stellar zoom lens, Canon has the 24-105 lens for this type of camera, which I think would be fantastic. But the other great benefit with this lens in particular is the fact that it does work with full frame cameras as well. So this might be a lens that you can carry over when you choose to upgrade your camera body. You know, obviously I haven't gotten my hands on these cameras yet, but I am hoping to at least get my hands on the R7 as soon as possible. That being said, if you are considering picking up the R7, I don't think it's gonna be a bad buy, especially for video shooters at all. Personally, I think that this is the camera that Canon should have given us originally when they released the RP, but as we all know, Canon is not just dealing with their own cameras anymore. They are having to compete with the world of Sony. And if they're going to compete, they're going to have to release cameras just like this. And honestly, Canon's been crushing it lately. So don't sleep on Canon and definitely don't sleep on these cameras. Okay, it's a quick funny story. I was actually about to upload my R5C versus C70 video, which I know you guys have been waiting on. But when Canon announced these new cameras, I had to make this video first. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and tune back in tomorrow because I'll be releasing that video then. But thank you guys so much for checking out this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.